Hey, hi guys, I'm back in the studio and I have a few tips and tricks and mistakes to avoid if you start mixed media, especially for beginners. You know, you get frustrated really quickly if you don't get the results you want, so make sure you join me over on my desk. Hi guys, welcome to my channel. I'm Natalie from Natalie Colbert Art and Mixed Media. Number one, if you're using paper, make sure you use thick paper. This one is mixed media paper. It's 98 pounds. I'm not sure how it works with that. I think it's how it got pressed. But anyway, just make sure. This is only 98. I recommend 100, but that's what I have, and it kind of worked fine for me. As you can see, I did a lot of mixed media in here, and it worked okay. I mean, sometimes it gets a little crinkled, but the problem if you use thinner paper, I'll show you here, and you use it, just, yeah, you can see it gets really crinkled and wrinkled, and if you don't like that look, especially if you make a fancy big piece, these are all obviously only just journal pieces, so not a big deal. I actually don't mind it. It kind of adds to the character of the painting, but if you're a stickler and picky about working, you know, making your nice piece and you put it in a frame, or you want to give it away, or it's a commission piece, then of course you want to make sure you have a nice piece. Like even this one that's not quite 100 is pretty good. I put watercolor on here and glue and acrylic paint, and it's still fine. So just, yeah, it depends what you want to use it for, but general, if you use paper, make sure it's thick. Either 150-pound watercolor paper or 100-pound mixed media paper, whatever, something that's over 100 or at least 100. And it says mixed media paper or watercolor paper. Okay? If you don't have that thick paper, you can use, like this is I think it's called a compositive. Can't remember exactly how you call these, but it's just a notebook to me with lines. Doesn't really matter, doesn't have to have lines. And in here, yes, in here I put gesso on it to seal the paper, make it more pliable, and keep the paint from soaking into the paper. So if you put more layers on top, as you do with mixed media, you will, okay, it goes right through. Now this is still not, you know, perfect. I could put more layers on it, but for me that's fine because it's just a journal, just for fun. But this is a way of dealing with the thinner paper, is prepping it. But even with gesso, so I have just liquid gesso here, but there is thicker gesso, like this. Gesso is black, but I had one in white. It's just empty right now, but this is thicker, so you need less layers of that. Now, these ones are also thinner paper, as you can see. So what I did, I just stuck a whole other piece of paper on top to make it easier to work with. But anyway, I'm off track. So if you use this kind of paper, it's always a good idea to put gesso on top, especially if you put very thick acrylic paint or inks on it. It doesn't get soaked right into it. You can manipulate it better because it's more on the surface, and you can, you know, dab it or move it better. If it gets right soaked into it, then you have a harder time and it kind of is more permanent. If you have gesso on top, you can move it around more and it's more fun to play with it. It all depends what you want to do with your mixed media, but this is just a good tip. Make sure you prep it with gesso. And then, of course, when you're all done, with your beautiful painting, you need to seal it. Okay, so this painting has quite a few layers. It's got a, see, it comes actually off here already, but that's not a big deal. This is just in the journal. I can just stick it back down. But if you're a little picky and this is like a nice piece you want to do for somebody special, then what you do is you put the first layer. Let's see if there's a thinner layer. Like you can see here, there's paper on it, and here too. You put that down first and then let it dry. And then with a heat tool, if you don't have patience, and then you put matte, because you usually glue it on with matte medium, you put that on top and it's dry to seal it. That way, that protects the first layer, and if you put like this another layer on top, it won't soak in as bad, and you can again manipulate the painting, like the paint, better, and it doesn't get soaked in. And you also can, the problem is you can also, if it's really thin like tissue paper or some kind of a what do you call it, packing, no, tissue or napkin paper, if you're not careful and you don't seal the layer, it can get ripped. Like you can really easily with your hand go over it and rip it. And sometimes, in my case, I actually don't mind that. But again, if it's a special painting, you want to make sure every layer is sealed. That way, whatever you put on top, you can manipulate and it won't affect the layer underneath. Me, on the other hand, I actually like the layers all work together, and I don't mind if that it bleeds through or doesn't work that way. But again, it all depends on the piece, and this is definitely a good tip to do, and especially when you're starting, when you don't know the different layers, how to manipulate them and how they interact with each other. So make sure you seal in between layers. Lots of people make the mistake and you just keep on layering, and less, stuff is left underneath because they keep on, the wet keeps on reactivating underneath, especially if you use watercolor, because that doesn't really dry, it's never permanent. It can come off, right? Mine are the same as before, similar. Again, make sure that the layer underneath is dried before you put the next, because again, it can move around, it can get soaked in, and it can come off, peel off, if you don't let it dry. Now, of course, if you're impatient, and sometimes I am, you can use a heat tool. I just use a hair dryer, but there's also little heat tools you can buy at the craft store. They're not expensive. So a good tip is, every time you put a layer down, dry it and seal it. Dry. And sometimes it takes a few days, especially if you have lots of layers. What I have is finishing off your piece. As you can see here, most of my pieces, they all have white or black or gold accent in here, and that's really important to kind of bring it all together. It just makes it more stand out, and you just emphasize the different little like the trees or the house. It just brings it out. Just adding a little shadow and a little light really makes the painting or the artwork. Like here, this is not a landscape, but you can see around the flowers, and I just use acrylic markers. They're really fun, and they're permanent, and they dry fairly fast. These were cheap ones, but you obviously can buy more fancier Posca pens. They're really good to do that. You can also use permanent, like what do you call them? Permanent markers to do that, or the Sharpies. You can do it with the Sharpies too. So it's a really good tip to make your artwork finish and make it special. This one doesn't have as much because I wanted to keep it a little more softer, but again, I still did some accents here and there, like little stamps too. They really are fun. I could put some stamps on here. It just adds more texture to it as well, and some writing, of course. I always like to put writing. This one doesn't because it's a landscape. I mean, I could, but this one doesn't have a lot of writing. But again, it has a lot of details. It just kind of brings out the artwork. So a good tip is make sure not to skip the step and really put some details in it. Like here, this is softer, so I just put some white paint around it and make it a little more romantic looking. Okay, so don't avoid finishing touches, very important. Okay guys, I hope you guys enjoyed these tips on mistakes to avoid. You know, there's nothing more frustrating than if you try to do an art project and then you get ruined by a mistake you didn't know, or get frustrated and don't know what to do about it. So I do like these tips. Sometimes it's the only way to learn it is to do it, and then you learn from your mistakes. But it's nice to know, from people that had done it a little longer than you, to avoid. This is a little part of a series, the tips and tricks series on mixed media. So make sure you watch the one I uploaded last week, and of course there's a couple more on that series, so make sure you watch that. I also gonna put my other channel I started up here. It's more a vlog channel all about traveling and starting a new life. So if you're interested in that, make sure you watch that. Yeah, so make sure to check all that out. Subscribe, like, and share. Leave a comment, please. Tell me if there's anything you want me to make a video on. Please let me know. I'll be happy to help if you have any questions. Okay, see you in the next one over there.